My name is Grace Whitmore. I'm a Lieutenant General in the US Marine Corps, but that morning, standing in full uniform outside my grandfather's funeral, I wasn't a soldier. I was just the unwanted daughter again, the family failure they locked out. The rain was cold, not the sharp kind that stings your skin, but the kind that soaks you slowly, reminding you of every door that's ever been closed in your face. I stood on the sidewalk outside St. Augustine's Chapel in full dress blues, medals lined across my chest, collar starched tight, boots shining. I had buried brothers in arms in silence, saluted fallen soldiers in desert heat, but nothing prepared me for the silence of being banned from my own grandfather's funeral. The old iron archway above the gate groaned in the wind. Through the stained glass, I could see them. My family, hugging guests, whispering behind white gloves, smiling like they hadn't just erased me. The words weren't whispered. They didn't even try to hide them. "Don't let her in. She brings shame," my mother's voice carried straight through the open door. "She failed. Let her stay outside like the disappointment she is," my father added. They didn't lower their voices. They never did. Not for me. And somehow that hurt more than if they had screamed. Elena, my sister, the golden child in pearls and perfect posture, stood at the church steps, glanced at me through the rain, and smirked. "Seriously? Who wears a uniform to a funeral? That's pathetic." I didn't flinch. Not when her words landed like punches. Not when a few guests looked my way, then turned quickly, embarrassed, though I'm not sure for whom. I stayed rooted, back straight, hands behind me in parade rest. I didn't beg to come in. I didn't shout. I just stood there, soaking wet, watching them grieve the only person in that building who had ever seen me, Grandpa. He taught me how to tie combat boots before I could even spell discipline. He let me climb into his lap when I was 9 and whisper, "I want to be like you." He'd called me his fighter. He was the only one who ever meant it, but he was gone. And now I was locked out of his goodbye by the very people who shared my last name but never gave me a place in their world. Some revenge stories are loud, dramatic, explosive. Mine didn't start that way. It started in silence. Rain, cold pavement, and the aching kind of loneliness that creeps into your bones and stays there. But what they didn't know, what no one there knew, was that this was the moment everything would begin to shift. They thought they'd erased me, but I was done waiting to be seen. You don't really notice when you're being forgotten. Not at first. It creeps in. Quiet, polite, almost like background noise, until one day you realize you've spent your whole life talking to people who never looked up. I was 8 the first time I noticed it. Elena, my sister, had just performed for release at some fancy recital. My mom brought her roses. My dad clapped like she'd walked on water. That same week I came home with a perfect report card, straight A's, even in math. I laid it on the kitchen table with a quiet kind of hope. My dad glanced at it once, didn't say a word. My mum picked it up, smiled politely, and slid it under a stack of magazines. "Good job, sweetie," she mumbled, without even looking me in the eye. I didn't say anything. I just nodded and went back upstairs. And that became the pattern. Elena was the chosen one, the soft-spoken, sweet-faced artist who wore pearls at 12 and had her own Pinterest board before high school. She said she wanted to become a designer, and overnight, my parents converted our basement into her private studio. They bought her sketchbooks from Milan, flew her to Paris for inspiration. Every corner of our house carried her fingerprints, photos, posters, little trophies. It was like she was the brand, and I was just background. When I turned 16, I told my parents I wanted to join the military after graduation. I still remember the way they looked at me. Not angry, not shocked, just disappointed. "Don't be dramatic, Grace. Military life isn't for girls like you. You'll grow out of it." But I didn't. I grew into it. And I remember one dinner that still clings to my ribs like a bruise. We were sitting around the polished oak table. My mum asked Elena about her portfolio. My dad told her how proud he was. No one said a single word to me. Not about school, not about my track meet win. Nothing. I was right there, eating the same roast chicken, breathing the same air. But it was like I didn't exist. I don't know why that night stuck with me more than others. Maybe it's because sometimes the deepest wounds aren't screamed, they're whispered by silence. And if you've ever sat at a table with people who claim to love you while feeling completely invisible, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Tell me if you've ever been in that seat, the quiet one, the forgotten one. I'm reading every story like it matters, because it does. And it started with a letter. I had just gotten back stateside after 7 months in Syria. I was exhausted, bone-deep tired. That kind of tired where you fall asleep in uniform, boots still on, and don't even realise you're on your own couch. The next morning, I made coffee, sat down, and started flipping through the pile of mail that had collected while I was gone. Ads. A birthday card from a fellow Marine. Junk. Then, an envelope from my bank. At first, I didn't think much of it, maybe a statement, maybe an update. I opened it absently, still half asleep. And then I saw the number. Negative. Thousands gone. I froze. Blinked. Reread it twice. I thought it had to be a mistake. I logged into my account. Balance. Negative. My savings? Empty. Investment fund? Gone. My pulse kicked up hard in my throat. I stared at the screen, scrolling through transaction history, page after page, small withdrawals at first, then larger ones, transfers I didn't authorize, payments to accounts I didn't recognize. I checked again, searched the routing numbers, and that's when I felt it, that cold, creeping certainty. Every wire, every deduction, every theft led back to one place, my childhood home, the address on the receiving account, my parents' house, the beneficiary names, my mother, my sister, a trust account opened under my father's social security number, and they'd been doing it for years, while I was deployed overseas, while I was training recruits, while I was giving my entire life to serve this country. They were draining me, quietly, systematically. I should have cried, I should have thrown something, but I just sat there, still in uniform, hands clenched on the table, staring at that screen like it might apologize. The worst part, I wasn't even shocked, not fully. Deep down, some part of me always knew. I trusted them to help manage things while I was away, trusted them to be decent, trusted that even if they didn't love me, they'd at least respect the uniform. They didn't. Later that afternoon, I drove to their house. Same white brick, same blue shutters, same flower beds my mum always fussed over. It looked the same. But I wasn't the same person walking through that front door. They were in the living room, sipping tea, flipping through magazines like life hadn't just shifted beneath them. My mum looked up and smiled faintly. "Oh, Grace, we weren't expecting you." I stood in the centre of the room and said it. Everything. The missing money, the false authorizations, the forged signatures, calm, precise, just like I was trained. They listened. Then they laughed. My sister rolled her eyes. "It's not like you need it, Grace. You're never even here." My father chuckled. "We were helping. You wouldn't know what to do with that kind of money anyway." And right there, in that moment, something inside me went quiet, not broken, just cold. Because now I finally understood they hadn't just taken my money, they'd taken something far worse. They'd taken advantage of my absence, they'd taken advantage of my trust. They'd taken advantage of the fact that I was still hoping, on some level, they saw me as family. They didn't. I didn't storm out of their house. I didn't shout. I didn't throw anything. That's not how I was raised, and it's definitely not how I was trained. I just stood there, absorbed everything they said, and when they were done laughing, I nodded once and walked away. 3 days later, I made my first call. Her name was Natalie Ruiz, a military attorney I'd worked with during a legal mess in Kuwait. Smart, sharp, no time for nonsense. I trusted her. I told her everything. She didn't gasp, she didn't pity me. She just said, "We'll handle this the way they never expected, by the book." Next, I reached out to a forensic accountant, Charles Yates, former Army, ex-Intel, the kind of guy who sees patterns in the noise. I handed him everything: bank statements, wire logs, signed forms. He flipped through them like he was reading a blueprint. They were careful, he said, not sloppy, but they got greedy. That's when people make mistakes. For 2 weeks, we combed through every line, every forged document. The more we uncovered, the clearer it became. This wasn't one moment of bad judgment. It was planned, coordinated, repeated. I felt strangely detached, like I was watching it happen to someone else. But one night, while we were cross-referencing a set of unauthorized withdrawals, Natalie paused and looked up at me. "Grace, has anyone ever mentioned a will? Your grandfather's?" I stopped cold. I hadn't even thought about it. The funeral, the way they excluded me, the fake warmth in their voices that day, they'd made me feel like I didn't even deserve to ask. But my grandfather, he saw me, even when no one else did. The next morning I drove to the house he left behind. It hadn't been touched in months. Dust clung to every surface. I opened the drawer in his old writing desk, sifted through files, tax returns, yellowing envelopes, and there it was, a faded green folder. Inside, the original, notarized copy of his will, his signature, my name. He had left everything to me. Not just the money, the house, the land, his personal belongings, the legacy. I sat on the floor, knees pulled up, the folder trembling in my hands. It wasn't about inheritance, it was about acknowledgement. My grandfather knew, even before they shut me out, before they laughed in my face, he knew what they were capable of, and he tried to protect me in the quiet, honourable way only he could. There was no dramatic music, no triumphant scream, just me, sitting in a dusty room, holding proof that someone had loved me enough to write it down. And for the first time since this whole thing began, I didn't feel erased. The morning of the funeral was grey and still. I stood across the street from St. Augustine's in full uniform. My medals gleamed, my back was straight, my boots hit the pavement like they belonged there. My parents saw me before I stepped onto church property. My mother's face paled first, my father stiffened, eyes narrowing. Eleanor tilted her head and rolled her eyes, that familiar smirk tugging at the corners of her lips like muscle memory. They didn't know what was coming. I stood there for a full minute, silent, unmoving. Then I heard it, the steady rhythm of boots behind me. 12 Marines, dressed in full ceremonial blues, marched down the cobblestone path like they were heading into formation. They moved with precision, shoulders square, pace tight, eyes forward. At their lead was General Marshall, his 4 stars glinting beneath the overcast sky. Silver hair, sharp posture, no wasted motion. The moment they reached me, the air changed. Guests froze. Conversations halted mid-sentence. All eyes turned. General Marshall stepped forward, removed his cover, and placed it to his chest. Then he saluted. "General Grace Whitmore, ma'am," he said, voice clear enough to cut stone. "We are here to honour both your grandfather's life and your service to this nation." For a moment, the entire world went silent. My father's jaw tightened. My mother's hands trembled at her sides. Elena was no longer smiling. I returned the salute, sharp, clean, then stepped forward. From the crowd, Natalie Ruiz emerged, dressed in a black coat, holding a thick envelope. She climbed the steps of the church, stopped just beside my family, and turned to face the guests. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said calmly, "I've been asked to deliver a message from the late Harold Whitmore." She opened the envelope. "This is the original will, dated and notarized. It states clearly that his estate, personal assets and properties are to be inherited solely by his granddaughter, Lieutenant General Grace Whitmore." Gasps, murmurs. A cousin turned to his wife and whispered, An aunt looked down at the floor. Natalie didn't stop there. Furthermore, she said, we are submitting formal evidence of financial fraud, documented transfers, forged signatures and misappropriation of military funds conducted by Charles and Margaret Whitmore during periods when Grace was deployed overseas. A full investigation has been launched. Civil and criminal proceedings will follow. You could hear the wind brush through the trees. Then one of the Marines behind me stepped out of line. He was younger, scar along his cheek, hands trembling slightly as he spoke. Ma'am, you saved my life in Fallujah. If you hadn't pulled me from that wreck, I wouldn't be here today. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. The uniform, the salute, the law, the testimony, they spoke for me. My mother blinked rapidly, chest rising in uneven breaths. My father stared at the ground like it might open up and swallow him. Eleanor backed up a half step, completely silent. And in that moment, under that grey sky, they weren't the ones in control anymore. There was no celebration, no applause, no "I told you so." Just stillness. After the funeral, after the salute, after the papers were handed out and the gasps faded into background noise, I went home. Not back to the house I grew up in. That place had never been home. I went to the quiet apartment I'd built over the years, just me, a stack of medals in an old wooden box, and the will my grandfather signed tucked inside a sleeve in my desk. And for the first time in years, I let myself sit, really sit. Not at attention, not on edge, just still. I ran my fingers across the medals, not for pride, but for memory. Each one carried a weight. Each one had blood on it, mine or someone else's. I thought it would feel like victory. I thought seeing their faces when the truth unraveled would fill something in me, but it didn't. Because here's the truth, no one tells you about being the one they left behind. Even when justice comes, you still carry the bruise. Even when you're proven right, you're still the one who wasn't invited. But I also realized maybe that's okay. A few weeks later, I took a portion of what my grandfather left me and did something simple, something quiet. I bought a folding table, an old coffee urn, a few crates of fruit, and I set it up near the edge of a park downtown. No sign, no slogans, just hot coffee and a few warm rolls for any veteran who needed it. Some days it was 2 people, sometimes 10. No one asked for names, no one saluted, they just sat, and so did I. We didn't talk about war, or rank, or courtrooms, just silence, warmth. Bread passed from one hand to another, and in that silence, something softened in me. The pain didn't vanish, but it didn't rule me anymore either. I was no longer the girl at the dinner table being ignored. I wasn't the soldier standing in the rain while her family locked her out. I was just Grace, and for once, that was enough. One morning, just as the sun peeked through the clouds, an older man with a weathered jacket took a sip of coffee, looked at me and said, "You show up, that's what matters." And maybe it is. If you've made it this far, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been the one they looked past, the one they never called, the one who did everything right and still wasn't enough? Because if you have, I see you. Tell me where you're watching from. If this story hit somewhere deep, I want to know you're not alone here, I promise.